Welcome, everybody. We are live. This is our 7th COVID-19 focused talkBD event. It's actually hard to imagine in some ways that it's been 3 months since we held the first of these. I don't know, time is doing this strange bendy thing for me in some ways, and a lot of other people I speak to. It feels like it's been no time at all, and then somehow the longest time ever. But thank you for joining us today. We are really excited for this particular event, which is featuring Dr. Lisa O'Donnell, who is a dear friend and colleague and is focused on work and bipolar disorder. I'll introduce myself first. I'm Erin Michalak. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I'm joining you from Sunshine Coast, where I live today. It's been 3 weeks since we last held our last event, and it's been interesting actually. 3 weeks ago, I would have said that I thought I was coping quite well personally with COVID and lockdown, and then things kind of went awry for me. I think one of the things that I had been doing well initially was really kind of prioritizing myself and some time for me and some time for gardening amidst all the work, and work got really tough for a while, and I think I worked too much and I paid the toll for that. And it's better now, but it's been an interesting few weeks, and so this is a really excellent time, I think, for me personally to get some tips on balance between life and work life, and thinking about how we can work optimally in these strange and unusual times. So I think with that, I'll pass over to you, Victoria.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, I'm glad to be here yet again. I'm Victoria Maxwell, and I give sort of a lived perspective and experience of mental health and recovery. I live with bipolar disorder, anxiety, and psychosis. And I joined CREST as a peer researcher probably from the very beginning, and have enjoyed many different kinds of roles and projects and working with different team members. And then as my full-time work, I'm a mental health speaker and educator. I perform theatrical solo shows at events, and I also lead workshops about mental health and creativity. And then thinking about what I really related to what you were saying, Erin, about coping well. I was feeling very sort of grounded for the first little while, and then things just went sideways. And I particularly noticed when the routine goes sort of awash, and then of course it can be a vicious cycle. So the more that I feel anxious or depressed, the harder it is to sleep. So my sleep gets out of whack, and then the more that my sleep gets out of whack, mood and all that stuff. But I'm beginning to sort of refocus that and feeling a bit feeling good. And I was thinking about sort of some hobbies, personal stuff that I've done. I mentioned that I run in the trails. I really like that, and starting to go to the beach more. So hopefully after today, I live on the Sunshine Coast as well. I might be doing a little bit of a beach jaunt with my husband and our socially appropriately distanced friends.
And Pedro, the dog, presumably.
And Pedro, yes, and Pedro. And that you also may hear a little bark from time to time if Pedro decides not to eat his bone that he's chewing.
Or to join in the webinar, you know.
That's right. And that's about it. And I'll pass it along to Lisa.
Thank you, Victoria. Hi, my name is Lisa O'Donnell, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Wayne State University. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm practicing currently in Michigan. And I'm a member of the CREST-BD team, I think, for a little over 2 years now as well, which has been a really exciting part of my career. And let's see, so I can relate to both of you in terms of, I feel like this experience has been a bit of a roller coaster for me. You know, some days I wake up and I'm killing it, feeling good. Other days I'm just don't even out of the blue. I'm like, well, it's not going to happen today. So it's been an interesting experience. One thing that's kept me going through this, that's really helped me, I really enjoy working out in fitness. So I was excited to see that some of my fitness instructors in the area have started doing live Zoom classes. And that's been so fun, and I've been really impressed with how creative they've gotten with at-home workouts. One time I worked out with a vacuum cleaner. And I have windows, and I'm imagining my neighbors walking by like, what is she doing? I'm just like lifting it over my head, and I've used a broom too, and that's been, it's been fun. So
I have to ask, my vacuum cleaner is like from the 1970s, and it's one of those super heavy old models. I have this picture of you with a like 50-pound vacuum cleaner.
no.
A lighter version.
This one's fairly light. It was enough of a workout, but not too strenuous.
Brilliant, thanks. There might be some people on the line joining us today who are new to one of these talks and what we do. We've mentioned talkBD, the collaborative research team to study psychosocial issues in bipolar disorder. Our footprint, our physical footprint is mostly in Canada, but as you will have seen from our previous speakers, we're international in reach. And it really is wonderful to have Lisa joining us today from the US. A little bit of technical stuff before we get into things. You'll be joining us today via Zoom. Hello to everybody who's on the line. There are quite a few of you, or just streaming through Facebook. Regarding the Q&A, the question and answer section, some of you have already submitted questions by our survey prior to this talk, so thank you. We'll be getting to those at the start. You can also type them into Zoom in the anonymous Q&A box, or put them right into Facebook, and Laura is working hard behind the scenes, as you can see, to organize those. There won't be any questions taken by audio though, just so you know. I think that's all I had for housekeeping, so with that I will pass you over to Lisa.
Great, thank you, Erin. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here and doing this talkBD event, and particularly this topic, as Erin mentioned, it's one that I'm very interested and passionate about. So it's really great to be here. So thank you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so and on this topic, and hopefully Victoria and Erin, will jump in if they have anything to contribute, which I'm sure they will. And then after that, we'll open up for discussion and questions. We already have some great questions that we received, so I'm looking forward to talking about those. So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus mainly on returning to work in this talk right now. And really the reason is because we're seeing a lot of people now returning to work as national and regional restrictions due to the pandemic are being lifted. And I think it's an important topic because transitions that significantly change our daily routine, such as this, can be really stressful and disruptive for anyone, and particularly for those living with bipolar disorder. So what I want to do is just discuss a few general areas to think about when you're planning your return to work. And I just want to also mention that some of you might actually not be returning to work at this time. You might be returning to work in your home. You might be returning to work in an actual new location. But we've had I think COVID-19 has also had a bit of an economic impact worldwide, and some people might not be returning to their, to the same position or to their work at all. It might be job searching. But my hope is these suggestions will be, relevant and useful for those of you, regardless of your work status. So the first topic that I wanted to discuss real briefly is just the idea of preparing for your return. So, instead of thinking maybe the night before or even the day of, just kind of, jumping into that return to work, taking a little time, maybe a week before, even longer if you have that time, to anticipate anything that might be helpful to practice and prepare for when you're going back to work. One way to do this can be even doing a mental walkthrough of what will that first day be like from the moment you wake up until the end of the day. And you might think about things that might be helpful, such as practicing getting ready in the morning, making breakfast, like not wearing yoga pants like I've been doing every day, and actually putting on work clothes, doing your routine hair, makeup, shaving. And for those of you with children that might be going to childcare summer camp, even practicing with them getting ready in the morning and helping them ease in the transition. Practicing your commute or, preparing for your commute, whether it's driving or public transportation, are there schedule changes for buses or subways or new protocols for safe traveling right now? Thinking about essential items you may need. Your ID badge. Do you have one for work? And I had a friend who forgot hers and showed up on the first day, and it was a little difficult. or, you know, passwords you might need to think about that you haven't used in a while because when you're actually at work. And lastly, just knowing what to expect, I think, can really reduce that anticipatory stress that is common when we're facing a transition. So thinking about, you know, can you go to your work environment and just check it out and refamiliarize yourself with it? And understanding, you know, what are the new protocols at work due to the pandemic, due to COVID-19, you know, especially if you work in the food industry, customer service, social distancing, you know, masks, all of that. And just having a sense of, you know, what you're in for when you get there can, I think, really be helpful as well. Anything, Victoria or Erin, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking of a couple of things that I really like the idea of transitions, right? So that there's almost different phases where I feel like there's a phase where we're sort of used to, as much as we can be used to the being in lockdown or shelter in place, and we get our routine around that. And then there's also self-management tools that we've used during that time. And then I feel like all of us need, but particularly those with bipolar disorder, need self-management tools for the transitions, for any kind of transition. And so those things that you talked about, being able to reduce sort of that anticipatory anxiety or stress, I know I certainly do that. And one of the things is just giving myself a lot more time, because I haven't been doing the things that typically wouldn't take me much time. So the strange thing is like returning emails right now, because my brain's sort of been in both places, working at home, and sort of everything's been a mishmash. And I work from home, but work is beginning to pick up a bit. So I still have my home office, but it's really about sort of carving out blocks of time. And I think you'll probably address that a bit. And then also recognizing, like for people, like for myself, who really haven't been working very much at all, recognizing that importance to it. I have a quote that I usually use. I wish I had made it up, but I didn't. I don't know who said it, but that treatment made me stable, that work made me well. And I think that's really, I think it is the truth for many, many people, that it gives us purpose and a sense of contribution. I've seen it even in the difference with my husband when, you know, he works for a small airline, and he went back just the other weekend for 2 very short shifts, and it just totally changed his demeanor, because, you know, he'd been off for so long. So yeah, I don't know if that's actually where addressed some of the things that you said, but there's some thoughts that popped up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, it's some of the things I'll talk about in a little bit will really relate to what you said, you know, especially thinking about what are we looking forward to with work? What can be really helpful in, you know, in terms of that self-esteem, confidence, fulfillment, right? So thank you. My next point that I wanted to talk about was thinking about when you're returning to work, establishing, maintaining support for your return. Research indicates that those living with bipolar disorder who have a greater amount of support from others tend to do better in their work functioning. And support can come in many ways, including mental health care providers, friends, family, coworkers, supervisors, human resources departments as well. But I just wanted to provide a couple specific suggestions that I have, and I'm sure, you know, Victoria will have a few to add herself. But one thing, before you return to work, schedule teletherapy, telemedicine appointments during the first few weeks of work, and just sort of have that support in place so that you know it's there, kind of a reassurance, or face-to-face appointments, depending on where you're at. Continue scheduling virtual calls with friends. So one thing that I found interesting is that I feel like I've connected with my friends more now that we're doing virtual calls, because it's actually a lot easier and convenient in some ways. And so, and it's been really nice and a huge support for me. And I think just keep maintaining that as we return to work, you know, scheduling these calls and knowing you have that friend to vent to because you had a tough day at work. Connecting with coworkers, even before you get back to work. Who did you miss when you weren't working? Who are you looking forward to seeing, and maybe scheduling some social distancing lunches or walking breaks. And one area I think is particularly important for this transition is talking to a trusted supervisor, or even somebody in the human resources department, but somebody, you know, that you trust at work to be able to, you know, request and talk about what kind of work accommodations you might be able to set in place to really help this make the transition easier and a healthier one. And I recognize that this brings up the topic of disclosing one's condition at work. And, you know, if we want to talk about that later, we can. There's a few resources on the slides, but I'm not going to get into it now. But if there are ways to, you know, identify work accommodations that you can at least do for yourself or talk to your supervisor about, it can be really helpful in that transition. A few suggestions that I have are, you know, when you get to work, you know, kind of like what Victoria mentioned, maybe just start with easier tasks, checking email, starting with less, you know, stressful tasks, and move in to the more complex one as, you know, the days maybe later in the week, if you can do that. Increase your hours over the first few days or week at work. Can you talk to your boss about, you know, starting part-time and transitioning to full-time? Continuing to work from home on some days. I've actually been reading how some businesses are even considering this hybrid model because they're learning they're saving money. And so, you know, if the work's suitable, having them work from home on some days and then come into the workplace on others. And is that something that, you know, might work for you to talk to your boss about? And flexible work hours is another idea. And this I really like. It's the idea of, as long as you're getting the work done in the week that you need in the number of hours that you're expected to be there, is there some flexibility? Let's say you wake up in the morning and you're having some side effects from your medication, you're a little down that day and your energy's low. Can you go in later and make up the hours, you know, that evening or on the weekend? So just being flexible with when you're getting the work done as long as you are. And then last one, having a conversation about time off for medical and mental health appointments in advance, I think can really reduce a lot of stress. So if you have a regular appointment with a mental health provider, or you might have to schedule a last minute appointment, you know, for a medication issue or even some symptoms you're experiencing, that if that conversation was already in place with your supervisor, it can feel a little less stressful to go to them and say, hey, I'm going to have to, you know, be a little late tomorrow for this appointment, or I'm going to need to leave briefly, you know, for this appointment. So those are some ideas I had. And Victoria, Erin, if you have any you'd like to contribute, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. You said almost all the ones that I would just echo them all. For me, getting back to work, when I was working in an office job, but even now, is the flexibility is the most important part, because it seems like, as much as maybe this is why people with bipolar disorder need routine, is that our natural temperament and our natural way of working can be so fluid that we need to have some structure around it, but we also need the flexibility to be able to maybe come in a bit late, as long as we're getting it sort of, instead, if it's deadline driven, as long as we get the product that we need to have done, as opposed to just being in the office a certain amount, like, you know, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I really like that idea, if possible, to, you know, if you've been working from home and now it's about returning to the office, or actually just starting back at work, doing that in some way that as gradually as possible. I was talking to the psychiatrist I work with and discussing that, you know, the more cortisol we have when we're under stress, it prevents us from being able to do a lot of the tasks that we find quite easy. So the less stress that we have if we can build into our return to work things to reduce our stress, the easier it will feel to do some of the tasks that we have to do. And it sort of builds that resilience. And I really found that really helpful to know that of the biological component to it as well. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say, but all the things that you said, those are the things that I use and continue to use for sure.
Can I chime in on that flexibility piece? It's such an interesting one, isn't it? And one of the things that springs to mind for me is that, you know, let's be frank about this. There are lots of people in jobs who don't have any flexibility or very little control over their work environment. My husband works in a big mill, pulp and paper mill. There is no flexibility for him in his start time. People are on factory lines or in the service industry. So that's not feasible in a lot of work environments, and that is something that is hard to negotiate around. So I want to be kind of frank about that. But then the other thing that springs to mind is in those work environments where it's possible or feasible, there's a real point of potential compassion on the part of employers to take the standpoint that you both stated, which was look at the productivity of the person, not the hours that they're actually sitting at their desk or doing their assigned job, and to kind of realign how we're evaluating what it means to be doing well in your job. And so there might be conversations around that with employers as we transition back into different roles that would be really helpful, I would have thought.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was even thinking as you were talking, like if having a regular meeting with a boss or supervisor to check in about that, and how they're perceiving your productivity, and just letting them know the work you have been doing. I think that could be a nice assurance that they understand, you're doing the work and you're doing a great job. So.
And I would want to say, and that also goes to colleague and coworker dynamics as well, because I think when people do get accommodations, it's sometimes seen as favoritism, particularly if there's an invisible disability. And so being able to ensure that productivity is still being adhered to, so that there isn't any sort of backstabbing or bullying or sort of underlying negativity. And I think also to some degree, although people can't, a manager can't disclose what a person is, why they're having an accommodation, it really is about increasing empathy and compassion in the workplace, because at any point someone can become disabled. Like no one's immune to that, whether it's through a psychiatric disability or something else. So yeah, I think it's an educational opportunity as well.
Yeah. The likelihood is more likely that we'll be disabled at some point in our lives in some way than not, right? We're the norm.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you very much. So the next topic I was hoping to cover briefly is what to consider when you're establishing your new routine. So the reality is, especially if you're returning to work either at home or in the workplace, that you will have a new routine, right? And evidence suggests that a structured and consistent routine is really beneficial for all of us, and it's essential for managing symptoms of bipolar disorder. And so I think this could be a great opportunity to be thoughtful and intentional about what do you want this new routine to look like, as much as you have control over it. So I wanted to give a few suggestions that I have and what to think about when you're establishing this new routine. One point, this is one of my favorites because I personally found it very helpful. As I mentioned before, staying at home has been challenging for me, as it has been for so many of us. And one thing I found to be extremely helpful is having a daily check-in. So each morning, checking in about, how it could be a mental check, or you have a mood log. There's so many online that you can write it out on a sheet or on your computer. But where am I at today? Where's my energy? Where's my mood, my stress level? And then adjust your expectations and plans for that day based on where you're at. And just be compassionate with yourself about where you're at. I found that to be really helpful, and just, when you set these high expectations and you don't meet them in that day, it can actually, be really challenging. So just kind of starting with where you're at. Second, getting up.
Sorry, yeah. I'll just jump in there. I find that really, really valuable and wise what you're saying, because also I find that it's a bit of a paradox, because the more that I have compassion for where I'm at, so if it's a day where I wake up and it's like low energy, low mood, and I sort of adjust everything accordingly, I become less harsh on myself while I'm doing these tasks. And I sometimes, not always, but sometimes end up doing far more than I actually expected to. And so it almost is like an inverse equation, where the more compassionate I am and the more realistic I become, I actually gain energy from that instead of sort of trying to power through. And I think that's really particularly important for me when I'm dealing with symptoms of bipolar disorder, particularly anxiety or the depression.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, if you have a packed planned day and you're not at a place where that might be possible, and you try to push through anyway, it can actually be very discouraging and overwhelming. And so if you meet yourself where you're at and accomplish those goals, then it actually feels really good, right? Like, wow, that was great. I did that even though I was feeling, not so great today. As mentioning another thing, and sleep hygiene is important for everyone, right? Very important. And so making sure to get up at the same time every day, particularly if you're working from home, I think this can be helpful. It's very easy to sleep in, as I've learned. And so trying your best to keep that regular, have a regular alarm and get up, regardless if you're going to work or not. And and again, I think this can apply if you're working from home or you're in a workplace, but do your best to schedule breaks and regular lunch times around the same time each day, keeping it consistent. Again, depending on the type of work you do, that may or may not be as easily done, but as much as you can, try to take those regular breaks throughout the day. Another point I thought about is, and this is something that, I think became apparent to me while I have been working from home, is creating a comfortable work environment. And this doesn't mean, again, this can be at home or in the workplace, but what things, use this opportunity now that you're returning to work to think about, like, what do I want at work? What's going to help me feel more comfortable and enjoy it a little bit more? Like, do I like, certain drinks around or snacks that I can just grab and kind of cheer me up, or headphones, when the work environment might be particularly noisy and you want to drown it out. Listening to certain music that you find relaxing and calming. My friends make fun of me and call me a dork because one of my favorite stations is a Pandora Lord of the Rings station because I love the music. It's so upbeat, but there's no lyrics. And so it doesn't distract me from my work, and I can really, zone into my work, and it still keeps me energized. So is there anything like that for you that you can just kind of plan for and put in place while you're returning to work? Another point is during this time, Victoria said that we've been kind of identifying what activities, self-care activities, things that we can be doing just to take care of ourselves, that keep us resilient. What are those activities that you identify that worked for you, and can you continue doing them and prioritize them in your return to work plan? And there's so many examples I'm sure we can think of. Some ideas are, continuing to go for walks. I've been working from home, and my neighbors, I see the same neighbors every day walking around, getting sunlight, vitamin D, and I think it's wonderful. Like, keep doing that if you can. What are the creative activities that you came up with, or your family, because you got sick of watching TV every day and you wanted to do, and you needed a creative outlet? I keep, identify those and try to continue doing them. I'm a professor at Wayne, as I mentioned, and I started online. I switched to online teaching at the start of the pandemic, and I asked my students to post, what creative self-care activities are you doing? And I was so impressed with their ideas. One of my students actually created a putt-putt course in her home with cups and ping pong balls. And I'm like, that's awesome. And another student started painting again and started selling them online. So she was making a little extra cash on Etsy. So what are your, to help you stay well and resilient activities that you can make sure to keep doing? And then my last point is maintaining convenient habits that you developed during the staying at home. And what I mean by that is a lot of us, started ordering groceries online and getting creative and working out from home and thinking about, like, wow, that could really save time and be efficient. Even if you are returning to work, can you still keep some of these conveniences that might just reduce your stress level and the number of responsibilities you have to do in the week? So those are some of my ideas. Victoria, Erin, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, Lisa, I really liked what you were saying, and I was thinking about when I used to work as a cashier at Safeway, and hearing Erin about your husband working at the mill, and sort of knowing that, let's say I had very little control over some things that I had to do. So I'm thinking for people that are returning to jobs that are more like that, recognizing the small moments of self-care that can happen. So, even if you're a server, or for me, when I was a cashier, there were opportunities that I could use to, like, just take, one deep breath, or take a pause right in between, or while I'm wiping down, the conveyor belt, even if there's a line of people. And then I think also then it didn't happen in that job, it happened in another job, but that's when it's almost more imperative to talk about what kind of accommodations, and that's the whole disclosure packet. But mainly because there's less, any kind of changes often involve other people, and so that has to really happen through a management system, and it makes it a little bit more vulnerable to do that. But I know when I've asked for accommodations, and it was a safe work environment, it wasn't a toxic one, I got really positive feedback, and I got very well supported, and I was very fortunate. And I know some people have had both very negative experiences and positive ones, but to me, where it is finding that locus of control within ourselves if we don't have a lot of sort of own control within our work.
And I really like, oh, Erin, you're going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that we have a ton of questions coming in. So
Okay.
finish your point, Lisa, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, so the last point, we had a little teaser earlier about it, and I'm just going to be very brief, but I do think it's an important one. When, I think I can relate to this personally, that when we have transitions approaching, whether they're positive or negative changes in our life, that we oftentimes can start thinking about, like, well, what's going to be, what's making me nervous about it? What's going to be challenging about it? What do I need to do to plan for it? And we sometimes overlook a really essential question that we also want to ask ourselves is, what am I looking forward to? So there's going to be, I'm stressed and I'm anxious about this, and that's completely normal, that this change, I think, for all of us to be feeling that way. But what else is there? What am I excited about? And, I just had a couple thoughts that I was thinking about, even for myself, of, maybe seeing coworkers, as I mentioned, or if you're in customer service, regular customers that you really enjoy. Getting out of the house. I have a lot of friends with children who are really looking forward to more adult time in their life. Making money again, being productive, being creative. People who work in industries, it's like hairstylists, for example, where you haven't had that outlet when you haven't been working. And lastly, again, just that having that regular natural routine again that work can really give us, that we don't often get otherwise. So that's just my last thought for that. So
yeah, I would just echo that, is that, and also just that looking forward to that sort of familiarity. I mean, it'll be a new normal, but it will be sort of, it feels like it's a wave that's going back to the ocean that we might be more familiar with. And I think that can bring some ease as well. Like every time there's a new thing that happens for Gord's work, my husband or myself, it's like, oh, okay, things aren't quite in the crisis that I thought they were right now. It's a little bit easier, and that brings a little bit of hope as well, which I think energizes people.
Absolutely.
I like that image of the receding wave, Victoria. Are you two ready for some questions? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you to everybody who's on the line. Hello, Japan. I think it's very early in the morning in Japan, so thanks for getting up at the very beginning of your day to join us. Let's dive in with some of the questions that came in before the event via the website. The first one was from somebody who was actually laid off during the pandemic. At the beginning of it, they've been job searching online. With restrictions lifting, they really want to build up the courage to job hunt in person. But frankly, they're still depressed and low and, feeling vulnerable about having lost their job and adjusting to these new conditions. Would you have any advice for them?
I'll go ahead. first of all, thank you for the question, and I'm sorry to hear about your circumstances, and it's very understandable to feel a bit discouraged and concerned, going back out there. That can be really challenging. I just have a few suggestions that I thought of for, especially when we're feeling down and depressed. I think goals can feel even larger and more overwhelming at times. And so breaking those down into really small, manageable tasks, I highly recommend that, because if you look at this, I need to go out there and start meeting people and get a job. That's scary, right? But if you think about today, I'm just going to start thinking about places I could potentially do that. So breaking it down, and then each time your mind wanders to like, oh gosh, like, am I going to be able to do this? This is scary. Go, nope. Today I'm only focusing on this, and I'm not going to, try to set that aside. So that's one suggestion I have. And two other things, and to build that confidence, to go back out there, would be spend some time thinking about the strengths that you bring to work. What has gone well for you in the past, and what do you bring to a work environment that people will really appreciate, and spend some time focusing on that, which can make you feel good, but also give you some ideas of what to talk about in job interviews. And my last point is, I always love, and when I work with clients, I get so many rolled eyes in the beginning, but I love role playing, even if it's with friends, family. It could be with some, a mental health provider, but practice talking to people. If you're going to go into a coffee shop and say, I'm interested in applying for this position, and have them role play. They can be tough sometimes, they can be really nice other times, and that can also help you feel more prepared when you're going into that situation. So
yeah, I agree with all of that, and I too, like, I am my background's as an actor, so role playing and rehearsing is sort of second nature for me, but definitely I know I get a lot of pushback when I suggest it. But it's all, and also, even if the places that you're thinking of applying to, walking in there before you even decide to ask for an application or anything, just to sort of get used to maybe the adrenaline going up a little bit. And then, walking out, just sort of that, almost like when you do the, there's a name for the kind of, when you try to help reduce anxiety. I can't think of the name of it, but anyway, there's a kind of like exposure therapy. That's what I'm thinking of. And the other was that I'd really say, in this time, if you're feeling anxious and depressed, whether it's clinical or not clinical, to enlist support. So when you're thinking about your strengths, I know when I'm feeling anxious and depressed, it's really hard for me to take stock of what I do well. So being able to have sort of some people to just sort of say, well, remember you did this and you're really good at that. And then also know that your brain is probably going to try to convince you that that's not true, and they're just saying that because they're friends. But you can just know that your brain will be doing that, and ignore your brain and just talk to your friends. And then if your brain speaks up again, you can say, thank you for sharing and caring, but I don't care about you. And that's sort of what I would do. And yeah, so I think that's one of the, and really allowing yourself to have a longer, maybe timeline for it, because it's harder, but just keep pushing those little tiny micro goals. So
depression can be such a trickster, can't it? Next question is actually about working from home. I feel isolated working from home. I've been missing the social connections of my work colleagues. How can I replicate this in my home environment?
What was that last part?
They want to replicate the connections they had in their work environment at home.
Well, I can quickly jump in with a perfect example of, this is my dining room. I don't have an office and I don't have a desk. I'm sitting at my dining room table, but I decided to create a little work environment. So I put a plant and a picture here and a lamp. So this is my space, right? So when I go here, I get in work mode, and that really helps me. And just, I have a couple thoughts, and I won't be long, but one is, it can be hard when you're working from home if there's other people in the house, and depending on the space you have, and I can relate to that, that just scheduling your time, so that, like okay, this is my work time, I need a little quiet, and then the other person can take turns, but trying to negotiate with the people you work with to see, like, can I have my set work time where there won't be any interruptions. If you're a parent, that's a little more challenging, and obviously negotiating around that as well. And what, another suggestion that I think can be a nice way to connect, and some people might find it a little awkward, I've actually enjoyed it, is having Zoom calls where I'm working with colleagues and friends, and we're literally just sitting there on our screens and we're working, and we'll mute it, and I have one friend and she'll go like this when she wants to say something, or we'll put a little comment in the chat like, this sucks, I'm really bored, or so. But if you do that, you're still connecting with someone even though you can't see them in person, because if you have some friends still working, that could be a nice way too. So those are some of the thoughts I have.
Yeah, the only thing that I could add is that also, like, if you are at a place where you have set lunch times, or even if you don't, ahead of schedule, if you used to spend time with coworkers, being able to set up sort of Zoom lunches or breaks or whatever, just so that you feel connected to the work space, but even though you're not there.
Nice pragmatic tips. This is a great next question. Because I have bipolar disorder, I often have to manage my mood at work, and it gets tiring. Something I've appreciated about working from home is not having to pretend to anyone that I'm feeling happy when I'm depressed, or check myself to make sure I'm not coming off as too erratic when I'm possibly hypomanic. I'm actually quite nervous about going back into a public work environment where I'm going to have to do this extra mood management again. And she finds it tiring.
Do you want to take this one, Lisa, and then I'll follow you with follow-up?
Sure, absolutely. It makes total sense, right? When you have to be on, and that can be really tiring, especially when you're really not feeling well when you go into that environment. And I think some of the work accommodation suggestions that we talked about could potentially help with that. That if you can start, either with easier tasks where you don't have to, or you're starting part-time, you don't have to be at work in the beginning as much, and kind of ease into that work environment of interacting with people. How have you been? How'd you handle being at home? All the questions that people typically ask, and they can be real personal and sometimes hard to field, when you're not feeling so great. Another thought that I had is, and this might be, whether you speak with someone like a supervisor, boss, or you can address or accommodate this on your own, but can you really plan some alone time during the day? Even if it's walking outside, getting alone, taking breaks, just to reduce some of the interactions and give yourself some time to recoup within the day, just sort of, give yourself a little recovery time. So that would be another thought that I have.
Yeah, I mean, those are some things that I was thinking of as well. I typically, whether I'm traveling and I'm not up for what I'm doing, but I'm able to do it, the bathroom is my friend. Bathroom stalls are my friend. I think they're the one place where I can go, and it gives a little bit of a cocoon, and then I can go out and sort of put on my work face for a while. And the other suggestion that I thought of was just practicing just, and this may sound really out of left field, but just noticing what happens when you're grocery shopping or doing things in public that you do for yourself that aren't with your coworkers, but just see how you feel and see sort of what makes you feel vulnerable, what makes you feel safe. And then come back home and you sort of use it as an experiment to see how you're able to sort of stay centered and maybe not be inauthentic and still be honest with how you are and who you are, but also allowing yourself to feel protected and safe. So it could be as simple as, maybe not having a long conversation, but just saying, I'm doing okay, instead of saying, oh, I'm great, it's fabulous, because I think it's sometimes less is more in this case.
Thank you. There's an interesting question that's come up about a specific side effect of a medication, and I'll jump in on it if you both don't mind. It's actually about somebody writing in about her husband who's having fairly serious hand tremors as a result of the medication that he's taking. He finds it an acceptable side effect in terms of payoff for stability and mood, but pragmatically has difficulties typing, even though he uses voice to text. We've already shared in the chat a couple of resources in there. So one of our peer researchers, Raymond, wrote a beautiful blog on dealing with hand tremors that speaks to this really well. And we also have some responses from a Reddit Ask Me Anything that we can share later as well. But it brings up an interesting broader issue, doesn't it, about specific side effects or symptoms that can actually be quite revealing in some ways. And I'm just wondering if either of you had anything to add about dealing with specific medication side effects in work settings that you might find useful.
I'll leave it to you two. I don't feel equipped, or that's not my area of expertise.
Well, I'm definitely not a psychiatrist, and so I, want to make that clear. But in terms of managing some of the symptoms, so at work, there's a few ways that I thought about this. That one day you're feeling a little bit more revved up and energetic. You might be feeling more like hypomania. One suggestion would be to really set some boundaries with yourself at work. Take breaks. To kind of pace yourself a little bit and try to use that energy and use it enjoy it, be productive, but also try to manage that and be aware of it throughout the day. And if you're feeling that you're losing a little bit more control, you're feeling a little bit more impulsive than you're comfortable with at work, maybe reaching out to somebody for support during that time. So that's one thought I had. Victoria, any thoughts on that part?
No, I think Erin, I think you said you had a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, and a couple of resources that we've shared already, and I'm conscious of a ton of other questions coming in, so let's just carry on diving in if that's all right. And I like this one because it's the polar opposite of the last one. It's not problems that you're experiencing yourself, but problems with other people. So this person is talking about and I've actually seen this more recently. I feel like some people in my work environment, it's just, it felt like stress has built up in a compound way over the last few months. And people are quick and angry sometimes in ways that they wouldn't normally be. And there's lots of times when I'm having to stop, breathe, not react. And I get that. And I'm like that myself sometimes. And that's what this person is talking about working with people online a lot, in Zoom, in Skype. People are stressed, kind of passive aggressive, but this person wants to support them. So it wants to help them, but at the same time, it takes its toll for people to be that supportive all the time of other people when many of us are all struggling at the same time.
Yeah, I can speak from experience, at least with my husband, because I know the last few months has been difficult for him as a caregiver, and even friends or coworkers, they may not have the same intensity around the support. I think one thing is to really ensure that you're doing your own self-management so that you have some energy and some understanding and empathy to give. Because if all you're doing is sort of trying to manage or put out fires or take care of, and you're not fueling yourself, it's the cliche that you put the mask on first in the airplane. And also, I think to some degree, it depends on what's bothering you most, is being able to either ask or brainstorm about what would help the most, like what would help them the most in what they're doing. And then also saying what would help you as well. So if you're wanting to address the passive aggressiveness, it could be, instead of sort of labeling it with sort of that pejorative or whatever, being able to say, what really helps me is when you're very direct about what you need, what you want, and then I can totally be there for you. And then being able to set boundaries about what you mean by there for you. I know that that's been helpful. So it's a lot about communication and knowing to do it when you have well rested and feel energized, as opposed to when you're tired, because then everybody's nerves are shot and things can go sideways really easily. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Lisa.
I thought those were wonderful ideas. I love the idea of, the self-care first and communication, assertive communication, right? So setting boundaries with people, if you are experiencing that, with the compassion that a lot of us are. Another thought I had, and I don't know if it's directly answering the question, but this thought of, with that compassion, understanding, trying not to personalize and take in some of that. And I think that can be a common thing as well, and recognizing that, this isn't about me, and that people, we're all struggling right now. And that can be another part of self-care, of trying not to absorb some of that negativity or, anger that you're experiencing.
Thanks. I'm going to try and apply those. This question is from somebody who's working in a non-flexible work environment where they have a set start time and end time to the day, and it's a time management question. One of the silver linings of working from home for them has been that they can really spread tasks out across the day, so it's not all in 1 8-hour period. And they're wondering if you have any tips for them in terms of having to move back into an 8-hour schedule and not having that control and mastery that they had before.
I wonder if there is any control within that. I'm not sure, but if the restriction is sort of your 8 hours, are you able to time block certain tasks at certain times of the day? So, some people are better working early in the morning and they can do all their brain work in the morning. Some people are better afternoon, things like that. So I'm not sure how much control you have over that, but that gives me sort of some sense of empowerment when I'm able to sort of look at that and sort of know when I do my best work for what kind of tasks. Anything from you, Lisa?
Again, it's if this is if this is an option, but one thing I thought of that I found to be helpful was just compartmentalizing the tasks. Like if you can spread the tasks out over days. And what I mean by that is, instead of trying to do multiple tasks on the same day, is it possible to just really focus on one, completing that one task throughout the day, and it might feel less overwhelming and more productive. And you leave with, like, I got this done, a sense of accomplishment. And then now I'm moving on to the next one. And although you're maintaining the same amount of productivity, you're just kind of redistributing it a little bit. So that was another thought I had.
Nice, thanks. Maybe time for 2 more questions before we sort of wrap up, if that's okay. 2 quick ones.
Sure.
I'll dive on this one because it's fairly simple. It's about caffeine and work, but it's actually a really good question. People don't know how much caffeine is often in, your coffee shop coffee as opposed to the coffee we make at home. So the question is caffeine a mood destabilizer? It's certainly something that is associated with sleep problems. And lack of ability to get to sleep. And so it's probably a really good tip to watch your caffeine levels as you transition back into work, I would have thought.
I can say that for sure there's days where I will only have decaf. I know it's a poor man's choice if you're a real caffeine drinker, but especially if I'm anxious, anything that can decrease the chances of extra stress or anxiety, and caffeine certainly, it makes me more susceptible to it, and I know research has shown that too. So I would say, if you can, allow yourself maybe a half a cup instead of a full cup or something.
Mm-hmm. Particularly on days if you're feeling anxious, because that'll ramp up the anxiety, the heart, the physical symptoms.
Yeah. The difficulty I also know is that when people don't have it, then they'll have a headache instead. So if you want to anticipate it, if you're going back to work like on a Monday, maybe sort of stop on a Thursday or a Friday, which means of course your weekend's going to be squashed. But anyway, it's like priorities.
Okay, one last super quick question for you to weigh on. It's very general, but it's a great question. Do people with bipolar disorder have more trouble with transition or change generally? Well,
I can something. I think that that people with living with bipolar can be more sensitive to change, and I think it can lead to some mood changes, especially if you're thinking about disrupting our circadian rhythm, right? That 24-hour biological rhythm that we have, that when you start shifting that, it can really start triggering depressive symptoms or even hypomanic manic symptoms. So yes, I would say that there is more of a sensitivity, and why I think we were making suggestions of really making, being thoughtful about your transition and what's going to make it the most comfortable for you, and the easiest for you.
Yeah, I would say that I have more trouble with transitions if I'm not prepared for them or if I haven't put thought into it. I think generally we are more sensitive to them regardless, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn to manage them fairly well.
Nice, thank you. Let's run you through a few resources and tools that we wanted to make sure we shared with you at the end of this presentation. We'll see if I can remember the slides in what order they're going to come up as we run through this. One of the things that we've done, because we just think it might help people, is provide a series of tips and tools through a PDF or a Word document that's been shared at the beginning, at the end, in Zoom, through the webinar system. So you'll have the links for everything that I'm going to show you over the next couple of minutes. Some of these have been referred to or alluded to specifically by Lisa, but certainly informs the content of her talk and have been resources that we've enjoyed over the last few days. This one, Preparing to Return to Work During a Pandemic, a useful article. Healthline article, which is a good website, quite credible, on managing bipolar disorder and work specifically. What you should know about COVID-19 specifically, and the Americans with Disabilities Acts, the Rehabilitation Acts, and other EEO laws. That's a US focused document. And from a Canadian perspective, we have from the Canadian Human Rights Commission something about the legal status and duty to accommodate in this country. This one we found just over the last couple of days, and is a nice find from the National Alliance of Mental Illness, or NAMI, on disclosing to others. Something that certainly came up a couple of times during this webinar. And then as part of the Bipolar Wellness Center with Victoria starring, we developed three different videos on work and bipolar disorder. My favorite of which is the one that deals with disclosure in the workplace, Victoria. And those are also 2 to 4 minutes in length and well worth watching. And then something that we've been working on, some of us in this group on the sidelines, is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC. We have a digital hub for mental health, which covers 21 economies or countries across the Asia Pacific. And just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a document that we've been working on for a couple of years, focusing on really making a business case for why mental health needs to be prioritized in workplaces, and has a number of concrete tools and resources really focused on employers, but also some stuff for employees in the workplace as well. So if you're coming in from an occupational health or organizational perspective, I'd encourage you to look at this document. And then finally, just to mention again that we're almost there with our recruitment rates for our survey of people, apps people with bipolar disorder are using. There are 2 versions. Over 160 people internationally have completed the version designed for people living with bipolar disorder. We were really looking for more men to complete that questionnaire, so please spread the word for that for us, and also the version for healthcare providers. We're almost at our recruitment targets, but we really need to know what apps people are recommending to support bipolar disorder, and that includes apps about working well in workplaces. So please complete that if you haven't and you have the time. And our quality of life tool, which is available online, does measure work satisfaction and performance, and at one point in time and longitudinally over time, so you're welcome to visit that. And our talkBD academic website, this is where we house all of the information about talkBD, our publications and news, And if you go to that website, you can find our Crest Currents. That's the newsletter we run, which tells you about all the events and research opportunities we have coming up. All the recordings of our previous talkBD live events and information about future events. It's really important that we hear from you about what topics you want covered in the future. I saw a couple of great suggestions come up in the chat just now, so thank you for those, but please keep them coming. And please also evaluate this talk at the end. There's a 1-minute survey that you'll get the link to. That's what it looks like. And finally, our Facebook page, which you can also access the links to these talks from. And a big shout out to the people who make this possible and support our work. It makes all the difference that we can come together and help people in the best way that we can during these times. So we have about a minute to close. Victoria, Lisa, is there anything you wanted to say at the end of this?
No, just thank you for letting me be a part of this. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed working with both of you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, the same goes. And thank you for everyone who's tuning in. I think it's just great. And I just really hope people have as smooth as transitions as possible. And for those that aren't transitioning to work, and work is slow, like I can say for my work as well, that things still, you know, just slowly we can get back to a new normal. And keeping our self-management tools in place will really help while we're sort of waiting until those things do. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'll just answer a final question that came in through Zoom, which is, when is the next talkBD? It will be in about 3 weeks, and we're just deciding on the topic, but I can see a lot of you want to talk about friendships and social relationships, so maybe we'll focus it on that. Thanks, everybody. Stay well in the meantime, and we'll announce the next talk in the next few days, so just watch our social media channels. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.